What is up, YouTube? In this video, I'm going to show you how to install this bomb insulated subfloor designed around my 2020 DIY Ford Transit campervan conversion. This design only requires a single template for the wheel wells and utilizes 3 4x8 plywood sheets as well as 3 4x8 rigid foam insulation sheets and 11 rails of 1x1 aluminum tubing. My name's Eric Johnson, and welcome to my channel. I'll be documenting and sharing everything about this DIY van conversion. If you'd like to follow along, by all means, hit that subscribe button.
What I've definitely seen like a lot of people do is they'll go through and make a ginormous template to match the entire profile of the van, and then lay that down onto like multiple pieces of polyiso and then kind of trace it out and then go cut each piece.
So instead of copying that sort of master template approach that I've seen everyone use, I decided it would actually be easier and I think more precise, or at least just as precise, to go with a sort of panel by panel approach. Because I know that I'm going to be using the square 1x1 aluminum tubes as studs or kind of joists, and they're going to be spaced fairly evenly at about 16 inches. It actually worked out to 15.6 inches apart. What I'm doing here is I'm cutting these panels that are going to be the insulation panels that fit in between those aluminum joists. Now, the math of my Ford Transit Extended, the length is about 165 inches, thereabouts, as far as my entire floor length. And then the width at the base was 5'9". So I cut everything to 5'10" just to give me a little extra slack. But as you can see here, these first few cuts, I kind of experimented with a number of different methods in doing the actual cut, ranging from using that speed square to trying to do them free-handed to trying to use one of those aluminum tubes as the cut guide. And none of these methods really worked very well. You'll see after a few experiments here, I do end up landing on using a track saw guide, of all things, was what gave me kind of the best results. The issue that I ran into with using the 1x1 aluminum tubing as the guide is that ends up lifting the blade a little too high, and then the speed square is just not long enough. You really want something that gives you multiple feet, ideally can at least run the width of these panels, so 4 feet plus. And here I'm not using nearly as much of the length of this retractable razor blade as I can. And the way that it's cutting is it's kind of like chopping. Whereas here I end up extending the blade and you see it just cuts so much smoother.
Okay, yeah. Holy cow. Look at the difference. Oh yeah, once we changed it up. Oh yeah, that went so well. Okay.
So my little eureka moment there was just kind of realizing just how beneficial it is to have as acute of an angle as you can so that the blade is really slicing as it's making the cut, like you see here. And it really makes just a world of difference. It's a lot cleaner, a lot faster, and the line is, of course, then more accurate as well.
And continue with our long rake all the way through. I didn't hear a pop. Yep, there it is. Okay. Oh, and look at how few crumbly bits are in that channel. There's like 3. Excuse me, coming through. Oh golly. Oh, that was... Eric, why are you wearing such a heavy, itchy shirt? Because it's 30 degrees outside, and every time I go outside, I feel like I'm dying a little inside. So I have a nice jacket. Well, Eric, why don't you take off your jacket while you are inside? Well, I have been. The problem is, I keep going inside and outside. Apply pressure, gently. Voila! We didn't need to clamp you. Nice long rake. Not cutting off our limbs. Excellent. Oh man, I'm totally getting the hang of this. Hey, and a bug! This is my sister.
Huh? Oh.
I'm recording.
Oh. Video. Hello, vlog.
Yes. So this is actually upside down, basically, is what you're looking at.
So this will be on the van floor alongside these. So these guys are gonna be like this, you know? And then you'll have these every 16 inches, roughly, little shorter. Resting on this, but not resting really on this, not squishing, compressing this, is the plywood.
So naturally I capitalized on my little sister's free labor and decided to kind of have her help me with my project.
So I make multiple marks, right? Not just like 2. Technically all you need is 2 and then you can make a line. But I do multiple because sometimes one of them might be off. Like in this case, this guy, you see how we're basically intercepting the little point of the V, but here the point of the V is totally outside. Look, see, we're intercepting and intercepting.
Well, maybe that's just because you drew it funny.
It could be, but that's also part of it is sometimes it could be that this was dented and so it pulls in further. It could be I messed up, but anyways, you do multiple spots and that lets you take a kind of like an average of your line. If you don't do a little hum jingle as you do it, yeah. It's less accurate. So we're not using any power tools. We're just using,
Saw?
nope,
An Axo knife. Oh,
this guy.
yeah.
Ta-da! Look at you go! You helped me build my van! I helped! Guys, I'm totally DIY. So what we're gonna try and do is basically bisect the line that we just made. An exaggeration, no, yes, right? Yeah, okay. Don't cut yourself, just hold this. So what I would suggest is keep this hand either next to the blade or in behind the blade. You see, so like as I'm cutting, if this is where you're heading, this is the front of the blade, keep this hand behind the blade, right? So you can scooch up if you want. And this has got rubber on it, right? See how I'm kind of, it's not moving. So it's okay to do it like in little sections. Yeah?
No.
So.
I told you I could not be trusted.
You're fine, it doesn't matter. So here. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to keep the blade butted up against this. So try not to kind of curve away, but then also you don't want to cut in.
Yeah.
So just try and keep them flat against. Yep, there you go. my little noodle. Okay, don't laugh. Oh, you're drifting, it's okay. So come back up here. Yep. And then, yeah, perfect. And then try and just stay against the, perfect. And then sometimes when you have a track that you've cut, it'll want to go back, so you just got to keep trying to guide it this way. That's fine. You're doing great. Perfecto. Boop. Okay, well. It was just that last little, she did great. Look at that. Look how clean that was. Look at how clean. Just ignores this over here. Look at how clean.
So there you have it. Using that method, you can get basically a perfect line even on your first try.
Perfecto. You already know what's going on. See? Yep. You're doing great. Yep, you're nice and flat against the guide. Perfecto. Yeah. You're doing great. See? Yeah. Look at that. You're cutting all the way through. See that? Just a little further. Boom. In one pass. Yes, I'm amazing. That was not a high five. I'm on fleek. Well, guys, this is my little sister. Doesn't look anything like me, but just trust. Manos. This is going to be the one that goes in between the wheel wells, so it's okay if it's shorter and I think also a little chunky. Like me. Okay, Eric, follow your own instructions. Flat against the guide. Nice long angle. Pressure on the tip. Tough freaking duh. Oh yeah. Look at how clean. Yes. Not a half. It's 15.5 plus. That's probably the easier way to say it. I should just say 15.5 plus. And this time around, I'm not gonna mess around with no stupid line. Yeah, you love me. Gonna leave life on the edge. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Just look at it. Would you just look at it? It's perfect. What am I on? Nobody saw that, right? Anyways, we're done. At least with the cutting of the foam.
So guys, 3 guesses as to which ones of these were my first cuts without the guide versus the later cuts where I was using the guide. Pretty obvious. But moving on, now we are finally kind of getting to the prep of the floor. And one of the first steps is kind of removing the original protection package that came with my van. So that's like the, you know, these hard rubber bumpers as well as kind of the rubber mat. But to get these bumpers off, you have to remove a couple of screws, but then once the screws are removed, you can just pull them right up. They're pretty easy to remove. So guys, I just want to take a quick second to say, if you are still here, still watching, I so appreciate you, and would also appreciate it if you give the video a like. It really does help me to grow. This video takes hours and hours to produce, and you can let me know that you're enjoying it just by giving it a like. So moving on to the aluminum joists, I got them pre-cut from the metal yard that I bought them from, all at 6 feet, and then I'm just cutting them all down to like their specific final length based on where they ended up in the final layout. And so the only real kind of high variance areas were in between the wheel wells, up front, and at the very back between those kind of B-pillars. Next, we're tracing out the one and only template that I used for my entire flooring project, including the subfloor and then the final plywood flooring. And I, as you can see here, went through basically just like a one step at a time, kept taking off a little bit more until I felt like I was making the full radius of that contour of the corner. And then once I reached what I felt like was basically the entire radius of the corner, I marked off each side and then moved to the other side. So instead of trying to take a single piece that spans the entire wheel and then you know, trying to find a way to take the reverse, I decided to just come at it from both sides and then make sort of like a bridge between the two. So you'll see I end up using this rigid cardboard that I already had as like scrap that I'd been saving. And then when I completed both radiuses, I just taped all 3 pieces together to kind of make like a single template. And this worked great. I would totally recommend this. I didn't have any issues with it, and I found it to be honestly fairly easy and quite accurate. Now, the one kind of asterisk or caveat that I will give here is, as you can see, I did not reverse the template. I changed from the left side to the right side, or drivers to passenger, or whatever. And I did not flip the template upside down, keeping front. So I don't know if the 2 wheel wells are completely symmetrical. It did seem to work out just fine. Here, I'm reversing it, but like I said, when I was checking the fitment, I didn't flip it upside down to keep front at front. On this particular cut, the panel that's going in between the 2 wheel wells, I did have to come back a second time and shave a little more, and that's perfectly fine. You can always come back a second time and cut a little bit more away. You cannot go the other direction, so I figured I'd play it a little safe and just kind of, like I said, cut on the inside of the line. And guys, I swear, I try my hardest when I'm filming this to give you guys a good angle so you can see what's actually happening, but sometimes my best efforts just are in vain. Now, this seems like as good a time as any to kind of call attention to the fact that I have repeatedly been calling this rigid foam board polyiso, when this is in fact polystyrene. Now, the reason I keep saying polyiso is because after quite a bit of research, I had determined that polyiso was the best rigid foam board to get, and I still stand behind that. And I thought I had in fact purchased polyiso, but by mistake I purchased polystyrene. By the time I caught the difference, I was already more than halfway through this project. I had cut everything, and unfortunately the kind of final nail in the coffin was that I could not find polyiso in stock in any of the stores near me. So polystyrene it is. Now, Moving on, this entire step here, if you noticed, the rail was about 3/8 of an inch, as far as this door step. The final piece of trim on that outside was about 3/8 of an inch lower than the rest of the pieces, so I had to come back with a piece of plywood custom cut to that 3/8 dimension, and that's just helping make up that height difference because there are no corrugations near the sliding door on that perimeter trim. So now with the dry run finished and everything fit perfectly fine, we're going to go ahead and remove everything and get ready for the glue up. You do notice that I've marked all of the panels just to make sure that I keep them in order. I don't want to be mixing these up, just to, there's a few key pieces and it is fairly noticeable as to, which one goes where, but I figured, taking that extra step of just labeling them kind of sequentially would give me like one last fail safe so that I didn't mistakenly put one panel in the wrong place when it's got adhesive and, make a total mess. Now, right here, I'm sure you guys will notice this particular section actually has 2 foam board sections, and this is basically just a classic example of, steal from Peter to pay Paul. As you can see, this rail right here would have actually fallen into a gap where there was no corrugations. So in order to avoid that kind of clearance issue and whatever headache that would have been, basically I added 3 inches to that section and stole it from the frontmost section, but it worked out in the end. So for this step, what I'm doing is I'm actually going to be sanding the tops and the bottoms of all of our aluminum joists. And this is kind of standard practice for most adhesives when you're trying to adhere to metals, try and give them the best surface area or, surface to bond to. Also, looking at the data sheet for the Seal Bond 105 adhesive that we're using, it does specifically mention that aluminum in particular, it has the weakest hold on. It is totally acceptable for aluminum, but just of the various materials that you can use it on, which does include styrofoam and it includes the steel, the aluminum in particular was the weakest surface for our adhesive. So I figured I would make sure to go ahead and scuff up the aluminum in particular to kind of help offset that. And this was the only area that I sanded down. I did not touch the bottom of the van. I didn't want to ruin the paint, seal, and risk adding rust to the actual vehicle. Aluminum doesn't really rust. It can oxidize, but it's kind of a non-issue for us. If you decide to go ahead and sand your aluminum tubing, you're going to want to wipe it down just to get rid of all like the kind of aluminum dust, and then go ahead and hit it with either acetone or isopropyl alcohol to kind of just make sure that it is, again, a nice clean surface. We're using acetone here to sort of wipe down the surface, the entire surface of the van floor. Just want to make sure that there's no residue, no oils, anything that's going to really kind of mess with, again, that adhesive. I want this to be a pretty permanent bond. I don't want anything kind of breaking loose over time. And so just giving it a once over wipe down, making sure it's nice and clean, seemed like a smart idea. All right, guys, this is the final step of basically the first half of the flooring project, and that is the final glue up. What I'm using here again is Seal Bond 105 for the adhesive for all of the aluminum tubes. This, as I mentioned, is not only compatible with steel and aluminum, but it's totally fine to get on styrofoam. It's not going to basically cause a chemical reaction that's going to eat your foam insulation. So that's one of the reasons we're using this. It is a permanent, I believe it's considered a marine grade adhesive. It's an above water, but we're not really going to be submerging any of this in water, so totally fine. And then after I basically run or install all of the aluminum tubing or joists, what I ended up doing is coming back and removing all of the styrofoam and then putting in a styrofoam specific adhesive. I don't know if it was really necessary for using 2 different adhesives, but I figured just wanted to kind of play safe, make sure that if I was going to be using a lot of adhesive on these styrofoam panels, I really wanted to make sure it didn't cause any kind of a chemical reaction or burn or anything like that and kind of damage the panels. So one tip I would give is if you're going to go ahead and use another additional adhesive for your styrofoam panels, it would have been handy to have had a second caulking gun, so I could have tried to do both at the same time. And If you're wondering why it is that I even was using an adhesive on the styrofoam panels, that is because the styrofoam panels are your most likely culprit if you're going to have any squeaking in your flooring system. So if the styrofoam rubs up against anything, that is what will cause the squeak. And so having movement, having that freedom of movement is what I figured would enable it to squeak more often, kind of rubbing up either against the vehicle or against the aluminum. Any kind of surface really can cause that squeak. So I decided to go ahead and use an adhesive because I don't want to go into a fit of road rage because my vehicle is squeaking 24/7 as I'm driving. So seemed like a good idea. Now, right here, this is the one and only spot, I believe, in my entire van where I actually installed wood directly touching the bottom surface of the van floor. Kind of in keeping with my design philosophy of having these channels open to allow airflow is, as I mentioned kind of in one of my earlier videos, my insulation video, I expect there to be moisture in this van, 24/7. There's no real way to prevent condensation. And since we're going to have moisture, I did not want to have any of the materials that are touching the van floor to really be susceptible to rot or mold. And so, like I said, that's the one spot where I do have wood kind of resting directly on the van floor, but just given the time constraints, I could not find any other material that I could easily cut to that exact 3/8 dimension, in between starting the glue up and when I got to that section. So plywood it was. So another tip that I would give this next section, not the one that I'm gluing right here, but the very next section, the final kind of joist that's going to go directly between the living quarters and the driver cab, this one right here. I would go ahead and cut this one just a little short. I cut it almost exact, and there's actually, as you can see, kind of two plastic trim pieces that come in on either side that sort of made this glue up a little bit harder than it needed to be. If I just cut this thing like half of an inch shorter, it would have been a lot easier to install and fit, I think, just a little bit better. So something to be aware of. And then here, as you can see, I put the aluminum down first, and then I have my 3/8 wood strips that I created. I'm gluing those on top, like I said, kind of in that effort to keep all of the materials that are touching the van floor as, rot and mold resistant as possible. All right, guys, this is the very last step, and this is that foam board adhesive that I mentioned earlier. Like I said, if you had two caulk guns, you could do both at the same time, but all I'm really doing here is just kind of adding a little bit of extra adhesive to these foam panels to try and prevent them from squeaking. One thing that I did do that I did not record was actually go back and I added a little bit of a strip around the entire perimeter of the van, between the van walls and the styrofoam panels, as, like I said, kind of another effort to try and help mitigate the squeaking. But that really was everything. Now let's do kind of a project breakdown. From a time standpoint, up to this point in the project, I believe I was somewhere around 25 hours in labor for cutting all of the foam, the aluminum, the miscellaneous plywood bits, the templating, and then the dry run, and of course here the glue up. When I get into installing the plywood floor, the next step, which will be in part 2, I'm guessing that was about another 15 hours or so. But getting into the budget for the entire insulated subfloor, including the 3 sheets of plywood, in total was $526, the plywood being the biggest category at $252, the aluminum tubing was $211, the foam boards were $41, and then adhesive, I had some leftover adhesive from a different project, so I really only paid $10 for the foam board adhesive, and then the hardware that I use in part 2 was $12. Guys, thank you so much for sticking around until the end. If you are still here, if you are still watching this, let me know in the comments. This was a monumental project, one of the longest ones that I've done ever, not only in the install, but also in the video editing. And so for the first time, I'm actually breaking up one of my projects into 2 videos. This is just part 1. If you want to watch part 2, where I actually install the plywood subfloor, go through the cutout process, the templating process, and we took a very unique approach to where we placed the seams, and we did everything out of 3 plywood sheets. The kind of like traditional way that I've seen, most people require 4 plywood sheets with their layout. So if you're interested in that, as soon as I have that video edited and posted, I will go ahead and link it right here. But like I said, thank you guys so much. I really do appreciate you sticking around. Let me know in the comments if you have any questions. I'll do my best to try and answer them. But like I said, thank you guys so much, and I will see you guys in the next video.